Nobody eating conventional food is exposed to a harmful amount of pesticides. Hit me, producer Potts.
Food is so expensive these days. And the thing that's frustrating is I keep seeing all over the internet that we should only be eating organic, but it's so expensive. Do we really have to focus on only selecting like organic fruits and vegetables at the grocery store, or is conventional okay?
Yeah, the quick answer is there is no reason to buy organic. Conventional is safe and nutritious. But I think that because this myth is so pervasive, it's another one of those zombie myths in the wellness community that, like, no matter how much science you throw at it, it just seems to keep coming back and again and again and again. I think we should like really break down the safety of conventional produce. There's a really, I think, it's a depressing statistic. It was done by, I've got it in front of me. It was a survey from the International Food Information Council, which is a nonprofit that sort of does consumer advocacy. And they, in their survey, they found that 60% of Americans were concerned about the pesticides in their food. And the action that those Americans took was 71% of them, therefore, because they were concerned about the pesticides, therefore avoided vegetables entirely, and 59% of those people avoided fruit entirely. So the fear-mongering around conventional produce, sprayed with pesticides and all these toxins, and that therefore we need to be buying organic, locally grown. I'm super fan of buying locally grown and supporting your local, family farms. Like that is absolutely a great thing to do. But in terms of the fear mongering that goes with that, like promotion of organic foods, the net effect is people who, have the budget, who have the access, sure, they go buy organic foods, but more people, way more, 71% compared to 29%, are just not eating fruits and vegetables because they don't want to be exposed to the pesticides. Eating a diet abundant in fruits and vegetables is one of the most important healthy eating patterns to support long-term health. It reduces risk of just about everything. The reduction in all-cause mortality, a general indicator of health and longevity, from just eating 3 to 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day is, depending on the study you're reading, about 25%, which is one of the biggest magnitudes of benefit of any food that we can add to our diets. So making people afraid of conventional fruits and vegetables because of the pesticides is actually harming people's health, because instead of going to eat organic, which is not better, they're avoiding eating these really important health promoting foods. So let's talk about pesticides. So pesticides are tightly regulated. There are many different ones that can be sprayed on different crops. There are many pesticides that are used in organic farming. So it's sort of a myth that there's no pesticide use in organic farming. It's just a different collection of pesticides. So there's mineral-based and oil-based pesticides can be used in organic farming, whereas synthetic pesticides can only be used in conventional. Pesticides are important for food crops because they help to increase yield and decrease damage from, I grow organically in my backyard, in part because I'm lazy and I don't mind if occasionally a plant gets eaten alive by slugs and caterpillars, and in part because occupational exposure to pesticides, and for some pesticides that can include you're spraying it in your backyard, that level of exposure to pesticides can cause a variety of health problems. But the amount that is on food crops, right? The amount that is on your apple or your kale or your celery, is so minuscule that there's zero evidence that that amount causes health harm. So every pesticide, there are many, every pesticide has a reference dose or acceptable daily intake level set, which we talked about in our Dose Makes the Poison video. And some pesticides will have different amounts set for different types of crops, right? So if it's an apple, it's allowed to have this much detectable in the final apple that's headed to the grocery store. But if it's chickpeas, it's only allowed to have this much, right? So each type of crop will have potentially a different level set for an acceptable level for the pesticide. And this is monitored by the USDA. I've got it in front of me. It's PDP. I should have remembered that. Pesticide Data Program. So every year, the USDA goes out and samples something like 10,000 foods from grocery stores. They have 6 or 7 states that have labs and state programs that they sort of collaborate with. Those samples go to USDA labs and they measure for about 300 different pesticides and pesticide metabolites. So things the pesticides can break down into in order to make sure that those safety levels are not being exceeded. So it's really important, right? This is why we've already talked about the Dose Makes the Poison, like how much is on our food. This is very tightly regulated. So when you look at this data, there are far more often than not, no detectable amount of a pesticide on a crop, but the amount of like single pesticide on a crop that exceeds the safety standards is 0.43%. So 0.43% exceed the acceptable daily intake level, which remember has a safety factor applied compared to the no observed adverse effect level. And remember, that's for chronic toxicity. So you would have to have the luck of the draw of that 0.4% of foods every single day for weeks to months before that level would be of health concern. So in practice, nobody eating conventional food is exposed to a harmful amount of pesticides. And according to this paper from 2011, so looking at the data from that year, I haven't been able to find a like similar analysis from more recent pesticide data program data. But that year, 3/4 of the detections were 0.1% of the chronic reference dose or less, which corresponded to 1 million times below the chronic no observed adverse effect level for those pesticides. And actually, when you look at this data, a huge percentage of conventional crops could qualify as organic. Their detections are so low that they actually meet the USDA organic standards.
So why aren't they labeled as organic foods in the grocery store then?
Because the USDA organic certification is rigorous and expensive. I mean, it costs a lot of money to get the USDA organic certified. And there's a lot of hoops to jump to get that. And if your strawberries are selling fine without it, like why go get it? So, so I mean, that's the reason. And then also, if you have the organic certification and if you ever have a crop test just slightly over, so for the organic certification, I think if I remember correctly, and I think so I just want to couch this statistic. I'm pretty sure that you can't have any synthetic pesticide level above 20 times lower than the acceptable daily intake level detected on your produce. So if something tests 19 times lower 1 year, then you lose your certification. You have to go through it all over again. So it's a huge hassle. And it means that it's out of reach for smaller farms because it's so expensive. And for bigger farms, right, it's a cost benefit. You know, is it worth the money and the continued compliance for this safety standard that, like it's up to the farm whether or not they want to go get that certification if it's worth it to them.
Okay, just as a point of clarification, make sure I'm following you. I can walk into the grocery store, I can get organic. If that feels good to me, nothing wrong with that. I can also go for the lower cost conventional because a good percentage of the time it's going to be just as good as the organic. Am I following you correctly on that?
Yeah, I want to clarify what we mean by just as good. So if you actually look, if you compare organic versus conventional, they have very similar amounts of pesticide residues. I will put a graph on this finished screen, and I'm pointing to, I don't know what side of me it's going to be on. I'll point to both sides. Here's the graph. It's only on one side. Over here or over here. But point a graph that was created by Dr. Steve Savage, who has a PhD in plant science and worked in agricultural tech for a long time. And he loves almost every year, he's done these like really deep dives into the USDA pesticide data program and done like really interesting analysis, like what percentage of different crops would actually qualify as organic that year based on the pesticide detections. And then he graphs them in ways that I think actually really help to visualize what we're talking about here. So I will put up a graph where he's actually showing the amounts of detections on average in the different the different categories. So like exceeding the safety standards, which is tiny percent, versus 10 times lower than safety standards, 100 times lower than the safety standards, 1,000 times lower than the safety standards, like crazy, almost none. But we've got this super sensitive equipment, so we managed to like find it, right? And showing very specifically just how similar the levels of detections are in each one of those groups between organic and conventional. It's actually surprising how similar they are. And it's not because there's some contamination of organic crops. It's because conventional crops have so little levels of pesticide residue, right? So it's actually showing you just how safe conventional foods are. So when we say good in this specific case, I mean, I think we can talk about nutrient density, but maybe that's a whole other video. When we talk about good, right now we're really talking about safety, right? So are we being exposed to an amount of pesticides that if we ate those foods, right? If we ate our 5 or more servings of vegetables every single day, would the amount of pesticides on those vegetables be enough to cause a health problem? And the answer is a resounding no. Actually, Dr. Savage also did the calculation for like different fruits and vegetables, what percentage of the ones in the grocery store would actually qualify as organic. Those are nuts numbers. I could pull those up and share them with you if you want.
I think that would be great. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, let's do it. So I have the numbers for fruits and vegetables in front of me. So this is, I think, really compelling data. So 84% of fresh tomatoes would qualify as organic. 98% of canned tomatoes would qualify as organic. 68% of sweet potatoes, 80% of spinach, 74% of potatoes, 97% of lettuce would qualify as organic, 68% of green beans, and 62% of cucumbers. I mean,
that's amazing. Okay, so I want to make sure I'm following you correctly. So when we hear on the internet, because you'll hear this, that conventional and organic have pesticides, it's not that they both have pesticides and we're going to get contaminated. They're like, the thing is, oh, well, they're both just as unsafe. That's actually not. It's actually the reverse. They both have pesticides and both are at levels that are super safe for us. So that makes so much more sense because like you hear that all the time. Thank you. This was so good.
Well,
Okay.
do you want the fruit numbers? Because they're even better than the vegetable numbers.
Oh, yeah, please. And why is this data not being shared all over social media? I mean, Sarah, maybe you should do some graphics on this for your social media because I think this is fascinating. I think this is way more helpful than some dirty dozen list. You know what I mean? Like, this is great.
Yes. Well, and in fact, of the vegetables that we just talked about, spinach and green beans were on the Dirty Dozen list the year that this data came from. So that was 80% of spinach qualifies as organic and 68% of green beans qualify as organic. With fruit, strawberries on the Dirty Dozen list, yet 76% of conventional strawberries have so low pesticide residues that they would qualify as organic. 69% of pears, 99.8% of oranges, 82% of grapes, 99% of grapefruit, 81% of frozen cherries, 99% for cranberries, 97% for apple juice, 76% for fresh apples, and 56% for fresh cherries. So even these fruit that are on the Dirty Dozen list, strawberries, pears, grapes, apples, and cherries, majority of the conventionally grown of those fruits would still qualify as organic because the pesticide residues are so low. The remaining percentage doesn't mean they have high pesticides. It just means that it's not so low that it could qualify as organic. It's somewhere in between that level, and still they're all still safe, even if they wouldn't qualify as organic. It's still, remember, like 3/4 of detections are 1,000,000 times lower than the no observed adverse effect level, right? They're 1,000,000 times lower than the level that we know is safe to be exposed to every single day for weeks, 2 months, 2 years. So this is really just like, again, more data showing how safe conventionally grown crops are, but also why it's important to have biomonitoring studies, right? That
Right.
0.4% of detections, what happens is, now those farms are going to be on a list. They're going to get, some inspectors come. They're going to have to change something. They're going to have more testing, right? Like they have to make changes to be in compliance. So like that's the other part of this, which is that this is tightly regulated, and why it's important to have regulatory agencies that are appropriately funded and staffed to be able to continue this important work to keep the food supply safe.
This is fascinating. This was really interesting. I feel like there's so much fear mongering about like, this dirty dozen, and maybe that's another video we do, or like this, be afraid of conventional, but you don't hear about these statistics. You don't hear about this data. It's like, why? And this is like diving into another can of worms, but why do people feel the need that they need to make someone afraid of the thing they're trying to tell you that you should be doing? Like, I think there's other reasons that people probably feel good about, supporting their local farmer or buying organic, and that's okay. We don't need to make that person afraid of the other in order to appreciate the value of the things that do matter to them. And I think like that's your whole point, right? Like we don't have to be in fear, and there's nothing wrong with organic if that's what you want to do, right? Like it's not one or the other, it's both.
Yes. So I could absolutely make a like farm worker safety argument for organic foods. I could make a soil quality ecological argument for organic foods, but from a human safety perspective, right, we still have the challenge of making enough food to feed the global population, and especially making enough nutrient dense foods. So things that help to improve crop yield so we can have more fruits and vegetables, so people can eat more fruits and vegetables and have the long-term health benefits from those eating patterns. Like those are important agricultural tools. And I think the fear mongering, I mean, the cynic in me goes, well, the fear mongering always goes with a sales pitch, right? It always comes with, be terrified of this thing, buy my this thing, right? But I think that also we want a scapegoat, right? We want something external to blame for public health challenges, for our own individual health problems. And when most people don't have an understanding of the types of concepts that we've been talking about here lately, like the importance of understanding dose and exposure levels, relative to, our body size and the particular compound we're talking about, how much is safe and how much is not, right? That type of understanding is not something the general public have. So that means that most of us don't have the knowledge base to be able to see the fear mongering and identify it as misinformation. Instead, we have a little enough knowledge that we're very susceptible to buying into that fear, right? It makes sense on the surface. This, pesticide in high enough exposure levels causes cancer. Therefore, your cancer can be explained by you eating apples, right? Like, that is a leap of logic. We understand over here at Nutrivore, and everyone who's been watching my videos lately, we've talked about this now in many different ways about understanding the importance of dose. We know that just because something is present in a food that may potentially be harmful, it doesn't mean the amount that is present is actually harmful. But most people don't have that knowledge yet, right? So it makes sense if you say this causes cancer, you ate that on your apple, you're going to be like, aha, all of my health problems must be due to that apple. Like
Right.
it's almost like we're an easy mark, right? Because we just don't have the knowledge base to be able to identify that fear-based marketing and know what's good information versus misinformation, and why we're doing so many videos trying to tackle these
Right.
topics to help people understand, because there's also, right, there's the pseudoscience piece of this and the science cherry picking piece of this. So there are a collection of studies showing organic foods lower risks of various things out there. But the systematic reviews and meta-analyses that have been done to look at overall, is there a health benefit to organic foods versus conventional foods, show there's just rampant study design flaws in these specific, studies that show, organic foods, something fertility, right? So these are the types of studies that are quoted often to scare people into buying organic. And as we covered on the top of this video, it actually scares people into not eating fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
But when you actually look at the study design, you do these meta-analyses, which, as we've talked about before, include a step where they evaluate a study for risk of bias, for how well controlled is it, how good are the measurements, right? What is the quality of this study? They show that overall, there's no detectable difference in health outcomes between eating a conventional diet versus an organic diet. And what these studies that are so often cited tend to do is they tend to not control for the types of foods people are eating. So they will basically say, oh, this person ate all organic foods and this person ate all conventional foods. And look, this person with the organic food diet had better health outcomes, right? But people who tend to eat more organic foods also tend to eat more fruits and vegetables, tend to eat less meat, tend to eat more plants in general, tend to be younger and female, tend to be more active, tend to be in a higher socioeconomic class, a really important social determinant of health, tend to have higher education, another really important social determinant of health. And these studies don't control for that very well. So they're not controlling for healthy user bias, right? So where so many different factors are stacking that you can't actually take that effect completely out of your statistics, but they're not even controlling for the quality of the diet. How many servings of fruits and vegetables is this group eating versus this group, right? So if you're not doing that control, you're not measuring anything meaningful about conventional versus organic foods. The studies that do control for that as best as possible, healthy user bias is still hard to separate out in this particular field of study because organic foods are more expensive, right? So it does sort of automatically put the person eating them typically in a higher socioeconomic class. It typically does go along with higher levels of privilege. So it's really hard to completely separate that out of the statistics. But the studies that have done the best job show there's no difference between conventional and organic, and it's because of everything we've already talked about. The amount of pesticide residues on conventionally grown food is 3/4 of it is a million times lower than what we need to worry about. The rest of it is still way lower than what we need to worry about. So it's, it matters far more that we're eating a diet that has lots of fruits and vegetables in it, that we're choosing more whole foods, right? That we're looking at, nutrient dense options, Nutrivore concepts. That matters, whereas conventional versus organic doesn't. That doesn't mean don't go organic if that's what you prefer. But I will say what I have done with this knowledge is I buy organic when it looks better, right? Sometimes you're in the grocery store and you look at the regular asparagus and you're like, this has been sitting here a while. And then you look at the organic asparagus and it looks like chef's kiss, like it was picked that morning, right? It just looks so good. Well, in that case, unless it's prohibitively expensive, I'll buy the organic option, right? Because it just looks better. But unless that's the case, I'm sticking with conventional and I'm saving my money.
Yeah, something I'll mention too is you mentioned at the top of the video that you do a garden in your backyard as well. But like gardens do take a lot of time, effort. You need the land and the space. But in some instances, that can be another option for people because everyone has a different level of risk, right? And so that could be another option if someone is like, because I could see someone being like, both organic and conventional pesticides, I just don't want any pesticides. Well, if you have the time and money and effort, like you could garden yourself, that's an option. And then the other thing is there are a lot of community programs, community gardens, and things that are more affordable that teach you how to grow food yourself and things like that. So there are a lot of programs like that in a lot of communities that you can reach out and also be a part of too. So that's an option. But I think it's so comforting to know that you can go in the grocery store and you just can ignore that organic label. Tell me if this is, me and my crazy analogies. So okay. Tell me if this is, if am I
searching for a hungry hippo video to add over top of this one again? Because that was a hard one to find. Okay.
I'm sure. Okay, so here's my analogy, and you can let me know if this is correct. As it pertains to, like you said, not organic workers, but as it pertains to our own personal health, is organic kind of similar to a brand name on a clothing? Like, I could spend X $100 on a pair of jeans, or I could go spend $15 on a pair of jeans. They're going to cover my body.
Conventional is like a Louis Vuitton dupe, basically.
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying. Like, is that a good analogy to think of it like we would, like any kind of branding, like you're paying for the brand.
Yes.
And sometimes that means higher quality, but not always. It doesn't, it's still going to do the function of what you need it to do, right? But it's like the aesthetic, your budget. Because I think about clothing, that's based on the functionality that you need. What brand you're going to buy is going to be your budget, right? So is that, have I made a bad analogy?
No, I don't think it's a bad analogy, but I would say, right, there's two different like possibilities here. So one is I paid the extra money for the brand name and it was a better thing than the like cheap like version of this, right? That I bought at, I don't know, Walmart.
Right.
That's just not made the same, right? It's not made in the same factory. It'd be more like that same factory makes, right? This, I don't know, Levi jean and this no-name brand jean. It's the exact same jean, but you're paying the premium price for the Levi brand, right? That's more like the
that makes sense.
Versus
you see that happen in fashion. That does happen.
Yeah, no, it does. It certainly happens. It's more like, a factory that's making for multiple brands. It's all the same thing, but all
it's like a good dupe
differently. Yes, it's like
conventional is like the good dupe.
Yeah. So I would say conventional.
Okay.
Yeah, conventional is like the perfect dupe of the more expensive organic.
That's a great analogy. Oh my gosh, that's so good. Well, thank you for explaining all of this to us. I hope that we can get some social media graphics up on your Instagram with these percentages. I didn't know this information was out there. We should definitely do that because this is way more helpful than that Dirty Dozen list. We need to put this out there instead. We'll cover that, I think, in another video, but this was so great. Thank you, Sarah. Can you tell people, when it comes to myths that can save them time and money and alleviate their anxiety around food, do you have more information like this for people to
I
access?
do. I have an entire chapter 10 in my book. Nutrivore is entirely dedicated to myth busting. Lots of like just bite-sized information, but also the citations if you want to go learn more. And I don't even know how many myths I bust in there. I should count at some point. So I have a 17. I don't know if it's 17, but it's a lot. It's a lot of myths. I also have a section on my website for myth busting articles that I am just starting to add to. So that's nutrivore.com/mythbusting. And I have a webinar that's called The Truth About Food Toxins that also goes through a dozen different myths, which is with some of the graphics that I will have to track down and find and put on this video when I'm editing it. So that's another resource if you prefer to learn through video content. But yeah, I care a lot about busting these myths so that you can eat a healthy diet easier, for cheaper, and without fear.
Great. I love that. Thanks so much, Dr. Sarah.
Thank you.